Okay, so in the previous videos we saw to create a custom activity to be used inside the process, a custom REST API to be consumed inside the view component or third-party website or third-party application. Let's see how we can debug our code. So there is a small, for each of the tutorial I show you how to do that, but this is like a separate tutorial. So like I did before, I'm going to go inside run. So I'm using IntelliJ IDE here because I have a license for it. You can do the same thing with IntelliJ IDE Community Edition, which is free, or Eclipse, or pretty much any Java IDE, doesn't need to be this one. I'm going to create a configuration, and this configuration is going to be a remote JVM debug for IntelliJ. And for Eclipse, I think it's just remote server, something like that. But the idea is just to connect to the JVM, to the distant JVM. You need to give the IP or the domain from Innovation Studio Server, and very important, you need to pass the port 12444. So here the configuration is done because we did it previously during the previous tutorial. And let's see what happens when I want to debug my code. So I just need first of all to set some breakpoints, for example here or here. Let's set up. So here I'm going to go in the process and I'm going to execute this process, but first of course I need to connect. So I'm going to launch my debug connection. So here I'm connected to the target JVM. So the reason why I like IntelliJ IDE compared to Eclipse is because when it connects to the JVM in debug mode, it's very fast. And last time I checked with Eclipse, it was taking sometimes up to 1 minute because Eclipse by default tries to synchronize all the threads, which can be very slow because we have a lot of threads in the platform, which is not the case with IntelliJ IDE. So even when you do step-by-step debugging, it can be quite slow with Eclipse, and it's actually, most of the time it's much faster with IntelliJ IDE. So here anyway, I'm connected. Let's see what happens when I debug my activity. You can see that IntelliJ is blinking, and here I can see my values. I can see the values of my sample object. So here I've not set the sample message yet, so I can just step. And here I can see my object. So I can just continue. Here the process has been done. And if I go here, I can see my output. So this is all we do for activity. Let's see what happens when we have our REST API. So let's take the URL we used before for test. So here same thing, it stopped. And you can see that you have the value of the username, and we can just release, and here is the result. So debugging the Java code is pretty easy. So of course, if you modify the code here, let's say that you add something, like here you would put hello world. And you run it again. Of course, it's not going to reflect, right? Because the code is here, is sitting on your local environment, and it has not been synchronized with the backend. So if you want to modify anything here and you want it to be reflected, you will need to build and deploy the code to the server, because it's not going to be executed locally, or it's not going to be synchronized to the backend automatically. So you would need to do a maven clean install -p export -p deploy. So by the way, if you're running in debug mode, it's recommended that if you want to sync the code, it's recommended to stop your debug session before actually deploying your bundle again. So you can just stop it, and then here you would just do a maven clean install -p export -p deploy. The main reason is that sometimes there could be some issue because you're debugging the same code that you're trying to synchronize or deploy again. So it's just better to just think about just stopping your debug server and then deploying your code again.